Hi everyone. So I've been meaning to read a little extract from my book Magical Masquerade for a while on YouTube, and I thought with Christmas coming up and people may be thinking about self-gifting or buying a book for a younger reader in their life, that it might be quite nice to read a little extract now, just to give you like a taster of what the book is like to read. So this is Magical Masquerade. I published it at the end of April this year. It was launched at the Belfast Book Festival and was part of the Dublin Book Festival and the Spooky Book Festival in Derry. So it's been getting around quite a bit and feedback seems to be really great from the kids and even adults that have read it. So I thought I'd read the first chapter for you today. May as well start at the beginning. And it's basically a fantasy adventure story set on the north coast of Northern Ireland. So if you've been here, if you live here, you might recognise some faces. If you haven't been here, doesn't matter. Hopefully it's still just an enjoyable adventure story, loosely for 9 to 12-year-olds, but as I say, younger readers have enjoyed it being read to them and older readers enjoy it as well. So it's called Magical Masquerade, and I'm just going to read chapter 1, and there's a little rhyme at the start of it as well. Paint the picture, set the scene. Where are you going? Where have you been? Red or speckled, black or white, give you a treat, give you a fright. What do I speak of? You want to know? Better perhaps then to stay here than go. But be warned, my dear reader, don't be in a hurry. The things in these pages may cause you to worry. With a witch, an enchanter, and a riddler who rhymes. There's also a banshee, quite scary at times. Goblins and pixies and fairies and sprites, some good and some bad, but they'll put you to rights. A mermaid or two and some nymphs of the water. You won't want to leave them, but really you oughter. For with magic and spells and tricks and deceptions, potions and lotions and some misconceptions, these folk of the fairy tale down by the sea, the secrets they keep and the places they be, are not meant for humans to touch or to see. Best hide if you glimpse them, best yet just to flee. But if you, dear reader, ignore this and stay, if my rhyming has not yet frightened you away, then keep turning the pages of the story within. It's the tale of a girl just a little too thin. When she went to the beach one sparkling spring day, she picked up a pebble and it whisked her away. Chapter 1. Finding Fairyland. Felicity Stone was not one to shy away from adventure. In fact, she liked to think adventure was her middle name. It wasn't. She had actually been christened Felicity Petronella Mirabella Stone Montgomery, but the less said about that, the better. She simply went by Felicity and Stone, her mother's much nicer maiden name. The problem was, Felicity always had to create her own adventures, as the exciting escapades she loved to read about just never seemed to happen to her. It wasn't for want of trying either. Felicity explored constantly around her coastal home. She kept her eyes peeled for the extraordinary and the unusual, but it was no use. Her yearning for true adventure, the sort that springs itself unexpectedly and energetically upon you, had never been satisfied, and she was starting to think it never would. She'd come to the beach a little out of sorts today, as her father was due to visit in the evening, and that meant news of her mother, which made Felicity somewhat nervous. It wasn't that she didn't want any news, quite the opposite. It was simply that she couldn't bear to hear if her mother had become any more ill, which she always seemed to be since her father had taken her away 2 years ago. Felicity preferred to think of her mum as the infectiously happy person of old, who had taken her foraging in the woods where they used to live and explained to her about the magical elements that surrounded them. The trees had their own language, her mother said. If you listened very carefully, you could hear them whispering in the breeze, though you would be a lucky person indeed if you could understand them, as theirs was a secret language and most humans could no longer comprehend it. The wind, too, carried mystical messages in its breath, she'd added, and Felicity had subsequently tried many times to eavesdrop on what it was saying. The wind, however, seemed to like teasing her and never gave up the messages it carried. Felicity could no longer enjoy those strolls with her mother, and she missed their talks of magic and mystery as they spent hours outside searching for hidden treasures. She was still a scavenger at heart, though, and loved nothing better now than cycling down to the beach to pick through the thick belts of seaweed and rocks, searching for unusually coloured shells and prettily patterned pebbles. There was always something to be found after the tide receded, and you never knew what that might be. That evening, the sea was like a lagoon. Clouds crested the sky overhead, gathering as if in anticipation, while the water slapped against the hardened, tightly packed sand. Felicity glanced at her watch. She was going to be late. She grimaced as she thought of what her father would say, or rather what he wouldn't say. He would simply throw Felicity a look dripping with disapproval and disappointment, tighten his lips and make her feel as important to him as a pebble on the beach. She remembered how furious he had been when he discovered Felicity had seen her mother doing what he called her hocus-pocus and divilment when she was just 5 years old. Felicity had found her mother squirreled away in the attic and watched as she mixed together some of the things they had collected outdoors in an old, chipped porcelain bowl, muttering strange words as she did so. Ever since, she'd half wondered if her mum didn't have a bit of magic in her. Felicity had never dared to voice anything of the kind out loud, however, as she had known that to do so would only have fueled the growing fire burning between her parents. As it turned out, the flames had fanned themselves, and the family disintegrated into ash anyway. She hurtled over a short stretch of sand, the sapphire sea sparkling in the fading rays of the sun. Spring was seeping slowly into every day, each evening a little lighter than the last. A playful wind picked up. Felicity loved this beach, which was backed by sand dunes, had a river at one end and a stream at the other. Rocks flung up from the ocean's depths by stormy seas cluttered the base of the dunes, while others, larger climbing rocks, marked out the shoreline. To her distant left was the village, to the right, a rugged coastal path that wound round the cliff. At the beginning of this stood the house, which had a tower, huge gates with a no entry sign, and a rather haunted look about it. It had been sliced up into holiday homes, so was very rarely inhabited and suitably intriguing. It dominated the landscape, and Felicity longed to explore inside. The house rose majestically from the headland, almost like a huge pop-up building from a storybook. It was built in bronze-coloured brick and had large, airy windows surrounded by white PVC, which looked out onto the beach below, making it appear old and new at the same time. The brickwork framing the roof looked like a gap-toothed smile, and a little rectangular wrought-iron balcony perched outside the topmost front room, while tall chimney pots prodded the sky and a row of converted outhouses backed the property. Then there was the tower. It was this which most fascinated Felicity, who couldn't help but think of trapped princesses and tales of magic and enchantment when she saw it. The rounded tower overlooked the sea and stood at the curve of the cliff. It had a properly pointed fairy tale roof, no visible door, and a single window at the top. Felicity often imagined herself inside and the fun she would have there, for what on earth could be more exciting than living in your very own tower? Grassy lawns, always neatly mowed, sloped down from the tarmac driveway, ending in thick hedges which sprouted plump wild tomatoes in the summer. A long straight lane was lit up at night by strategically placed lights, while a former gate lodge guarded entry to the main place of residence. How Felicity would have loved to hop over the gate and run across the garden slope to inspect the grounds for herself, but she never dared. She had always been taught to respect the property of others, and it was a rule she in this instance grudgingly upheld. She raced now across the sand, in the shadow of this grand abode, heading towards the end of the beach where her bicycle waited by the fast-flowing stream that chattered down through the fields, past the cliff and onto the sea. As she went to cross it, however, something unusual caught her eye. The stream was glowing gold, or rather, a certain part of the stream was glowing gold, and it seemed to grow brighter the more Felicity looked at it. She recalled her mother telling her that, as well as the wind and the trees conversing in magical languages, all the rivers and streams and seas of the world talked too, in their own mysterious ways, and she wondered now if this stream was talking to her. Felicity's grandmother, it should also be said, liked to tell tales of magic, sending shivers down Felicity's spine with eerie stories of the other realm and of the mischievous fairies and creatures who lived there. She often spoke of the dreaded banshee, who haunted the cliffs on stormy nights, seeking souls destined for the underworld. The banshee foretold a death, she said, and was slippery as a shadow and dark as night, with a mourning wail that could chill the skin off your bones. Yet she could also appear as a great beauty, tricking those she wept and wailed for who expected to see an old hag. Most unsettling of all, her grandmother warned, the banshee could take the form of a hooded crow or a stoat hare or weasel, so you could never be too careful. Felicity much preferred to hear stories of fairies and elves, even witches, and she usually got her grandmother to tell her about those instead. So it was the most natural thing in the world for her to suppose the glowing stream was caused by magic. What else could it be? She knelt down for a closer look and found that the light, now pulsing rapidly under the water, came from a large golden rock. Her heart hammering with anticipation, she slipped her hand into the cool, clear water and clasped her fingers around it. The rock was oddly warm and felt smaller than she thought it should. Indeed, when she brought it out of the water, Felicity saw that instead of the large golden stone she had expected, she was holding a small, rounded pebble. It was smooth and looked as if it had been dipped in glitter, or speckled with fairy dust. Somewhere in the distance a bell tolled, and as Felicity wondered whether the pebble might be magic or not, or whether it was real gold, the wind decided enough was enough. It spun around her in a flurry, and if anyone had been there to see it, they would have been startled by the sight of a mini tornado seeming to appear out of nowhere at the end of the beach on this quiet, ordinary evening. It encircled Felicity, and before she had time even to gasp, it whisked her away. Of course, when there's magic in the air, you'll always find there's somebody watching, somewhere. And as Felicity disappeared, a flock of crows happened to be dipping and diving overhead before they went home to roost. They watched the magical episode with interest, and then, as one, released a torrent of agitated squawks and set off over the dunes, as if intent on conveying the news of what they had just witnessed to someone who should know of it. Travelling by wind was a most unusual experience, and Felicity, who wasn't a big fan of flying by ordinary means in an aeroplane, was more than a little anxious when she was swept off her feet. However, like most 10 and 3/4-year-old girls, she had a sense of when something extraordinary was happening, and she knew at once that this was magic. So, in the midst of the mini tornado, she decided to open her eyes, as she felt strangely secure and didn't have any sensation of falling or of dust whizzing about her face. Indeed, Felicity found that she was still standing upright in the eye of the tornado, suspended as if in outer space. Cocooned from the outside world, like a butterfly in its chrysalis, all she could hear was a mixture of silvery bells and sighing wind, and all she could see was the cloud of white around her. So she had no idea if she was still on the beach, close to the beach, or aeons away from it. She supposed she might by now be nowhere near it. Felicity wasn't alone, however. Floating around her was an odd assortment of objects, which she studied with great interest. There was a blue-painted door with a shiny gold knocker just a little way above her, and all sorts of brightly coloured flower heads danced in the silent space. Their lack of stems made them look like strange, bodiless faces, and when one floated quite closely past Felicity, she was sure she spied 2 curranty eyes peering back at her. There was also a solemn teddy bear with a patch over one eye, a garden rake with bent, misshapen spokes, a rainbow-coloured umbrella, and long strings of ladies' pearls. Felicity spied an empty chair below her, but try as she might, she couldn't move herself near it, so she simply watched and waited to see what would happen next. What happened next was that she felt earth under her feet, and the sound of the silvery bells melted into the distance as the tornado unwrapped itself from her and then twisted away into nothing. The wind had deposited Felicity on a beach which, at first glance, looked similar to the one she had just left, but which immediately afterwards appeared to be so different to where she had been that she wondered why she had thought it the same at all. In the sea, wild horses galloped towards the shore with delighted whinnies, their snowy white manes streaming out behind them in the breeze as they raced each other out before heading back out to the depths to do it all again. Far out on the horizon, Felicity saw a silver ship, which shone like a polished diamond in the strange half-light of wherever she now was. Billowing white sails gave it a proud appearance, and as she watched, the ship sprouted 2 long, white wings on either side of its hull and flew off among the candy-floss-coloured clouds, disappearing from sight. She was still standing at the end of the beach, and at the bottom of a coastal path which wound around a cliff. In the background, a sing-song sighing sound could be heard, while around her grew all manner of sweet-scented flowers. They bordered a stream not unlike the one she'd been trying to cross before, but swimming in the water were curious creatures with green bodies, long, thin legs, and hair that looked like seaweed. These had most certainly not been in her stream. They weren't quite mer-people, as they clearly had legs instead of tails, but their feet were webbed, and there were tiny gills on the cheeks of their pointed faces. A couple of the creatures saw Felicity staring and grinned at her mischievously, popping their heads out of the water to let off bubbling laughs before dipping down beneath the surface again. Seaweed lay coiled like silver snakes on the shimmering sand, which was speckled with gold and almost looked like fairy dust. Felicity pocketed her own glittering gold pebble, placing it first in a small pouch that she carried for stowing away such treasures, as she knew she would never find it if she dropped it on this dazzling sand. She jumped as a large black bird appeared from nowhere and swooped past her with a raucous squawk. Huge, powerful wings took it down the deserted beach, a dark silhouette against a sky oddly streaked with green and yellow, and strewn with those plump pink clouds. Far off in the distance, a bell tolled again, and Felicity was about to explore a little further when she heard a tinkling much closer to her. She turned to see where the sound was coming from, and her eyes fell upon a fairy. That is chapter 1 of Magical Masquerade. So hopefully you enjoyed that little extract, and it hopefully gave you a taster of what the book is like. Obviously, this Felicity has found fairyland. She's just arrived, and what happens next? Well, if you want to know, you'll have to read the book. So it's available on Amazon, and you can get that as a paperback, which is $9.99, or as an ebook, which is about $2.48 or $2.99 or something like that. So yeah, if you're interested in magical adventure tales, if you know any young readers who love to read that sort of thing and want to give the gift of reading for Christmas, I know I always looked forward to getting my Christmas books when I was a child, I still do, and just curling up the good book at Christmas time, then yeah, feel free to check it out. If it's not your thing, that's no worries. I just thought it would be a nice time for you to kind of share a little bit from the book. Hopefully I'll maybe read some more extracts from it at a later date, but thanks for watching this one, and I will chat to you soon. I'll leave the links down below as well to Amazon if that interests you. Okay, thanks for watching. Bye.